In today's world, we are increasingly dependent on technology. Our business and personal lives rely on it, but as you've probably noticed, it's unreliable. They promise it'll get better, but it usually gets worse. Our computers are slow, so we end up squinting at smartphones and tablets. We live in constant fear that something's going to happen to our personal data, so we're scared into paying for fake protection that proves useless when disaster strikes. Update attacks, fake Wi-Fi, cloud control, and other industry scandals are designed to keep the money flowing. The jokers we pay to fix our stuff have no clue what they're doing, so they do a virus scan and then wipe out our precious photos. Intelligent, successful people feel intimidated by the chaos and think it's somehow their fault. If they only knew what the industry was doing to them, they'd get torches and pitchforks. If only we had someone to explain it all in plain English so we can start protecting ourselves. Oh wait, we do! It's the Computer Exorcist Podcast with your host, Mark Anthony Arena.
From the Wallace Memorial microphone in my home office, my new home office, overlooking the Can of Worms in downtown Rochester, New York. We are recording here in the new home office for the very first time. This is the Computer Exorcist Podcast. Mark Anthony Arena here. So happy you are here, and so happy I have a special guest today, Joe Dimino. He interviewed me on his show called Famous Interviews, and I said, I want to know about this guy. I want to have him on my show. Turns out we both are computer guys, and we both agree on the same stuff, so I'm excited to hear what he's got to say. Joe, tell us about you.
Yeah, hey, Mark Anthony, thank you so much for having me on the show. Yeah, I'm kind of a chameleon. I'm a computer tech by day for a large school district in the Kansas City Metro. I'm a podcaster. I have a jazz radio show. As you can see behind me, I'm a visual artist. That's one of my paintings. I write. I just kind of keep my hands dabbled in a lot of things. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Oh yeah, and this is an audio podcast, but the audience can imagine the art behind you. That's really cool, actually.
Thank you.
So how did you get into jazz, and how did you get into computers, and any of this?
So we'll start with the computers. I remember having a word processor in the 90s, and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And then I got my first computer, a Packard Bell at Best Buy, put it on a credit card, got that behemoth. I lived in the basement of my folks' place, and all my friends were like, all right, this is the place. And we just tore that computer up. And I really got interested, and then from there, I got a job as a desktop publishing specialist for a home health agency after I graduated college. And that kind of coincides with my broadcasting. I always wanted to be on the set of ESPN, Bristol, Connecticut, right by Keith Olbermann or Dan Patrick. That was the dream.
Oh, I've heard of college friends working there, yeah.
Yeah, so I went to school for broadcasting. And I got in there. I became an intern for the Kansas City, or for 61 Country station, doing pre- and post-game production for the Royals. And it was like, on this place called Signal Hill in Kansas City. And it was KY 102, which was one of the best rock formats in the 80s. It was this hallowed place. And I'm in there and I'm like, oh my God, I'm here. And I used to be kind of the schlep boy. I'd go out and get this place called Hertford House, a famous steakhouse in Kansas City. We'd run ads for them during the production. And I'd have to go food. Sometimes I would eat, other times I wouldn't, but I was bringing it all back to these DJs that we worshipped in the 80s in Kansas City.
Wow.
So I'm good, like Skid Row and Marty Wall and all these fantastical names. So anyways, I kind of got on the inside, and there was a couple baseball players that were hosts, and I got to talk to them about baseball, got to figure out how it worked. And I was ready, man. And I remember going to a sports broadcasting camp during that same summer and met Bob Costas, Dan Deerdorf, all the guys. I was ready to go. Okay. I mean, when we saw Bob Costas the night before, all of us sport broadcast geeks couldn't sleep. We thought we were going to meet the second coming of Jesus. We all were freaked out. So anyway, that was kind of my trajectory. I finally, long story short, I got on the inside of the sports broadcasting world. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. I was covering the Royals at the time and going to the clubhouse when Hal McRae was there during the dark days of the Royals. David Cohn just came back from New York. There was a lot of strife. It was weird. So once I kind of went through the whole grinder of sports radio, I was like, I can't do it. It was too much, no pay. The guys weren't happy. There was just a lot of, there was just an abrasiveness that I didn't want to go for with my career. So
and there's billions of people who are fighting to be a sports broadcaster, right?
Yeah.
Like 99% of the people in my town worship sports, and that's all they want to do.
Exactly. But there was a level of these guys that were just, there was a core to them that I just didn't like the way they rolled. I just wasn't into it. Maybe other people were, but I just couldn't do it. So I got out and I kind of recalibrated my life. What am I going to do? And I got into this job with the home health agency and I started doing more computing. And the thing about the 90s and computing is you get grandfathered in because all of the upper ups are cheapskates. So they want you to learn networking. They want you to learn all these things. This was pre-certification days. So these guys would come in and be like, hey, can you look at this mainframe? Can you do this? Can you do that?
Yeah, you're a computer guy. You can type.
You're young. You just go in and say, good, I'll do it. So
you figure it out.
That's kind of how all of it kind of started for me. And I ended up becoming an IT director for a home health agency later on. And I always had the jazz or the broadcasting on the back burner. I never really gave it up. So I started doing some voiceover work in the school district, the Grandview School District I work in. And I started kind of getting that magic back in me because I used to cut the sports page out when I was in school. I would read the script. I would listen to the tape on the way to school, which was 30 minutes away. I went to the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and then I would listen to it on the way back. I was a student. I did that. It was in my blood. I loved it. So anyway, I'm going to fast forward to when it all really began. I was doing freelance work, and I ran into a show called The Neon Beat, and it was the American Songbook. I got this Radio Shack raccoon with a radio in its belly. I turn it on. There's the Neon Beat. This guy's doing it, John Christopher. And I'm like, I got to reach out to this guy. I reached out. I said, I love your show. I love your delivery. I love what you're doing. And we interviewed, and I did an article on him. He said, why don't you come to my house? It just so happened he was 4 blocks away.
What?
All the equipment in his house came from Signal Hill, the station that I worked in the 90s. He was an engineer for Intercom. What? So all of it was Kismet. So he said, come to my house, write a script. Let's go. I just picked jazz. 2011, I did it, and now I'm on show 826. So, and when I started it, I said, I'm going to interview jazz musicians. I'm not taking information from a book. I'm going to the source. It's America's music. I'm going to get their voices. And that's how it kind of all took off. And it just spiraled into this famous interviews. It just kind of became a part of what I do.
And these people, as we were talking about before the show, these people have stories, right? Why would you read from an article when you can have these people with raw stories, right?
The living history, man. And they are. Jazz people are the coolest, most grounded people in the world. The higher up you go, like Sonny Rollins, Lou Donaldson, these guys, they are more humble on the top than they are anywhere else. And they all want to preserve this art form, and they all want to take care of the youth, and they're just gentle, good creatures, and they're talented beyond belief. So, yeah, I ran in because I diverted my life and it took a while to get back in. I finally found some of the finest human beings on the planet. I like to call them the Jazz Jedi Council. They're like the Swamis in Cloud City and Empire. They're just kind of up there, and they have this magic about them.
They really are, and you know what's? And by the way, you're cordially invited to come with me next year to the Rochester International Jazz Festival. If you've heard of that,
yes,
it's actually, as much as I complain about my city, it's actually one of the best jazz festivals. I went with my college roommate way back when it was the first and second year, and it was just like 20 hippies wandering around, right, and us, and it was. Every year it gets more and more popular, and it's a good thing. We want it to be popular, and it's just jam-packed now and well-known.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's on my list to get up there, you know, even in Manhattan, to see the Vanguard and Smalls and all of that, and then make my way up. So, yeah, I need to make a pilgrimage from Kansas City at some point.
Yeah, And you know what's funny? The way you talk about these jazz artists being gentle creatures, right? Like my dad's uncle was a big jazz guy. And he played with all the greats, right? He played with the Manjonis and he played with all the greats. And I have a cousin as well who we were talking about earlier, and he's just the most gentle, humble, yet monumentally talented person. And if you look at my logo on my website, my company logo is it's like a personal logo, right? I'm going to use it in I'm writing a book about psychology, and I'm going to focus on it. This symbol that I invented, I call it the full circle, right?
Yeah.
So you've got, if you kind of imagine, you know, the Hanna-Barbera thing where the star was spiraling, right? So you've got a circle that starts out thin and it ends up thick. It's actually the best way to put it. And so what happens is you've got, and you can apply this to anything, right? Think about like the poor, and then you've got normal people in the middle, and then you've got the rich at the thickest end, but the thinnest end always touches the thickest end, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, and this, when you were talking about jazz people, this is how I imagine them. These are people who usually start out super broke, and they're usually hyper intelligent, right? But they're at the, what I call the full circle. They're at that intersection where they've seen it all. They've seen the Wheel of Fortune, right? They've been broke. They've seen success. They hang around with really crusty people, and they hang around with really refined people. And they've seen it all. Sometimes they'll have ups and downs in their careers, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely it does. Yeah. And
so they've seen it all.
They have, absolutely they have. And that's the thing. It's like they almost seem like the well-traveled poet, like they're collecting stories, they're collecting fodder, and they're going to turn it into music that we're all going to fall in love with.
Yeah. And it's like, think of Hemingway, right? Like extreme success, but extreme trauma, and that sort of, right? So that's how I envision jazz people. And then they're just these gentle people. It's wow. Yeah. I could talk to you for hours. This is great. So, and really, we need to talk more off the show as well. But what my key thing, right? My key point of why I do my show is to explain technology in plain English and teach people, as I might have said on your show, look, you're all intelligent, successful people who did not grow up in this world. And by the way, this IT world seems to try to intimidate people. In order to gain more monthly revenue, right? We're gonna scare you into thinking you need Norton, otherwise you're gonna have problems. You need this, otherwise you're gonna have problems, right? Intimidating people into buying products and services that they never, ever, ever needed. And the industry also complicates itself exponentially every day. Right? So I'm here to remind people, you're all intelligent, successful people. You are not stupid. Your computer, a lot of people, my computer guy said I was stupid. No, you're not stupid. You're an intelligent, successful person who was thrust into an industry that deliberately intimidates. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. In fact, you just sparked an idea that I wrote down. The funny thing about IT is that it's like jazz. People are intimidated by jazz. They think it's highbrow. You know, and they're kind of scared away by it, kind of what you said about IT. So I wrote this the other day, and it actually comes to it. I said, ironically, as overanalyzed and frightening as folks make jazz, 99% of the world comes to it because it's fun. It's like a non-scary amusement park of magic and wonder. And
that's all jazz was meant to be.
IT is.
Yeah, that's all jazz was meant to be, is a rebellion.
That's it. And IT has that magic and wonder, which is why we get sucked into it.
Yeah, like you and I got into it when it was a rebellion, when it was fun. Remember Hack the Planet, the movie Hackers, right? We got into it because it was countercultural, and now it's kind of taking us over and squeezing humanity.
Absolutely. I mean, we were doing it back in the day when we were making fun of Steve Jobs with the turtleneck, and
Yeah.
Ballmer got on stage with Gates, and they were all doing that goofy dance.
Developers. If y'all haven't heard this, go on YouTube right now and look up Developers by Steve Ballmer. He got up there, and this guy, he was Bill Gates' poker buddy. He probably knows nothing about computers, but here's this big, huge, sweaty guy up on a stage in a suit and tie, and he doesn't know how to motivate his programmers. So he gets up there and developers.
Yeah. Well, and the proof that Steve Jobs is probably more savvy is that he would never let Wozniak do that. And Wozniak was the brains behind it.
Right.
He wouldn't do that. He'd be no way. I'm not dancing to a song on stage while you get up there and do this whole thing.
I mean, if I was Steve Ballmer, I would get up there and dance around and get all sweaty because, hey, I'm a billionaire and I'm here to make my employees laugh. Like, that would be cool. But you're totally right about that, because with Apple, you had Steve Wozniak, who was the computer side, and Steve Jobs, who was the translator. And I strive to be that. I strive to be the translator between computers and people.
Yeah. The interesting thing about IT too is that what you're doing as a whisperer is that it's gotten dangerous. People get ripped off. There's a lot of stuff going on. So it's kind of like, all of these other tech things that get invented, like Facebook used to be kind of this fun realm. And now it's this place where you can go to jail if you say the wrong thing and all of this stuff.
Right. And where people go to fight with people they used to love.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's almost as though IT or technology, these platforms have become a police state. It's become the Orwellian novel we all were like, oh, I hope we don't go there. And we are there. I mean, you look at even COVID. I remember at one point early on where New Yorkers and even people in bigger cities would look at people that would go outside without a mask and report them. It's like,
they'd report them.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and you know what? That's exactly stuff. If you read the book, the 1975 book called The Russians, it was written by a failing New York Times author back then, and everything he said in 75 is now happening here, where people are reporting each other and everything. And I say this all the time, too, that big tech, number one, aims to supplant government, and has in a lot of ways. It micromanages our daily lives, right? So the other thing I say is that it is the Soviets' wildest dream. It really is. The surveillance and the micromanagement are better than the Soviets could have ever imagined possible.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was just reading a story last night. Speaking of the threat of news and information and technology, some story came out, and it's not corroborated, that apparently Putin had a heart attack Sunday night.
What?
His guards found him in his room, resuscitated him, and they put him in some intensive care unit, and he's recovering. But they're all saying you can't fall for that. It's like, that there's a level of that's getting out because it's trickery,
Wow.
But that's the idea of disinformation. We didn't have that like 2 decades ago. We didn't have Snopes and all these other things that said, did this happen? Did this person die? I mean, we're just getting into this place, which is why there's so many weird stories that are floating out there, because we have so much information now.
Right, and it's all chaos. And honestly, it's the Pandora's box of, if these people had a microphone, they would have done. Like, if 100 years ago you gave someone the internet, they'd go around scamming people and lying too, right?
Yeah. But the beauty of like that Christian Slater film, Pirate Radio, when what was that? He had that radio station. Like that kind of a thing was really cool, to think that somebody could sneak music out to people and put cool things out there. And now that's the upside of technology, is that we have the opportunity where we can do this on our own as independent producers, and we can get our opinions and put our things out there. And that's what I think is so cool about this newer generation. Lots of them are starting their own businesses. They're becoming entrepreneurs. They're living their lives. They're taking that Gen X baton and furthering it down, saying, I'm going to take control of my life. I'm not working for, the man. I'm going to be the one. And it's kind of cool. Technology's opened that door up to a lot of people.
Yeah. So and I did an episode like 10 years ago in my traditional radio show that I had, and I said, technology's bad. And I had this guy, Pastor Ken, on. He goes, Mark, wait a minute. Not all technology's bad. What you and I are doing right now is good. So it's something to remember. I'm going to read an article if you're ready.
Yes.
May 2023 Electrical Contractor Magazine, Backup Disaster, a lesson about data storage learned the hard way. I have been teaching people how to use computers since around 1984 and have always recommended that users back up their data. In the early days, failures were a lot more common. Hard drives were prone to crashing, which is literally when the read-write head, the needle on the hard drive, actually crashes into the surface of the hard disk. Other types of hardware software failures can cause data loss. Even when you undelete a file or pull it out of a recycle bin, didn't come around until several years after I started using computers, he says. Today's computers are much more reliable, but still subject to data loss and glitches, failures, viruses, malware, fire, theft. It's still very important to back up your data. How you do is also important, as I learned recently. Right? And side note, like, it's preposterous that this industry is so disgustingly unreliable that backup still isn't a thing. And 99% of computer guys who I clean up after have never even suggested backup to their clients. I walk in vast majority of the time. I say, okay, we're going to clean your computer, yada, yada, get all the dust out, get all the Norton out. And wait a minute, did you have a backup? No, my computer guy never said anything about it. He just said I should buy a new one before this one died. And I said, are you swinging from vine to vine? Right? That's what I call it. It's just living on the edge. I said, I don't care if your computer's 10 or 15 or 20 years old. It doesn't matter as long as you have proper backup.
Yeah.
Right? Because even a brand new one could die. It's not about the age. It's you need backup no matter what.
Yeah.
Basic, what I call computer hygiene. These dudes have no clue, right? It's one thing, Joe, and you know this, right? It's one thing if our clients are not savvy, but the dudes they trust to clean their stuff, right? What if the cops couldn't prevent bank robberies, right? And they walked around with pop guns.
No, I get it. My thing, and it's kind of like the Geek Squad guys.
Ugh.
The most redeeming thing that comes out of the Geek Squad people is that I want to have a badge myself. That's the one thing I admire the most about them. I would love to have an IT badge.
A badge?
Have you seen it?
No, I clean up after their destruction on a daily basis, but I don't know they have a badge. I mean, the badge must say, like, I'm certified to know absolutely nothing, and I'm certified to destroy.
It's actually like a police badge they get to carry around.
Oh.
And I've always thought as an IT guy that would be great just to walk in and be like, I got it, man. We're good. I got the badge. We're coming in.
You know what? And side note, that's a societal thing where one of my advisors told me, he goes, Mark, why do doctors wear a lab coat in the office? They're not getting dirty. It's because the uniform carries gravitas, right?
That's it.
And
Exactly.
if I didn't hate the gimmickry so much, I would carry some kind of a badge. Or, one of my clients said, you should wear a cape,
Right, I hear that too.
Wow.
and I get, you know what I get in the school district? All the kids that see me, they all think I look like Iron Man. So they all call me Tony. So
You do?
Yeah. I get them all the time. I had a woman at Dairy Queen like a year ago say, "Oh my God, you look like Robert Downey Jr." And I almost want to reach out to Robert Downey and say, look, if you need a doppelganger, let's get this going. Let's figure it out.
If you do and I used to have that in college. I had the mustache with the little chin part.
Yeah.
If you just fixed your hair like that.
I will. I'll modify. Do some manscaping.
Okay, so he says, I came into my office. There was a big message on the screen from my backup software that said my data drive could no longer be found. I took the computer to a technician, oh boy, hoping they had some tools that could access the drive. No such luck. I had a spare computer. I quickly got it set up with my programs, and I started restoring data from my online backup service, all right? And this is very important. It says the database file for my estimating software could not be found. That's when I started to panic. After 4 hours on the phone with tech support, I did not have my file. The next day, they still could not find my file. I was in panic mode. 2.5 years of electrical estimates lost was a big problem. This was huge. Side note, he was probably infected with carbonite, which is the big name in online backup, and usually the biggest name is the worst name in our industry. Have you found that to be true?
Yeah.
Okay, Carbonite, GoDaddy, HP, Carbonite, GoDaddy, and HP, right? So I rescue people from those three all the time. So here's the deal. Carbonite or any other online backup software cannot back up your what I call weird business software. Because weird business software is made by really extra sloppy slobs who keep the data elsewhere. They don't understand to keep the data in your My Documents folder. So they keep the data, and QuickBooks does this too. They hide the data in some deep, deep folder that is not included in your backup. So all y'all out there who are using QuickBooks or any other weird business software, your stuff is not being backed up with your online backup software. And nobody understands this. No computer guy in the world understands this, except perhaps you and me. And I feel a little less alone today.
Yeah, right. No, I get it.
Having you here, I feel, because usually it's I'm the only guy in the world and all these jokers, and dudes just shrug their shoulders and laugh you off and kick you out. You know, it's ironic that a lot of them have badges and certifications, and none of them know any of this.
I know.
So he says, what do I learn from this disaster? A single backup source is not adequate. No, that's actually not true. Just remember to point your online backup toward the folder that your weird business software is hiding your stuff in. How about that? So you could have, this dude doesn't understand, you could have 10 or 20 or 30 online cloud backups and automated backups and whatever. And it's still, if you don't specify the location of your weird business software, there's no point.
Yeah.
So that's not true at all. He says, after a little research, I got a Western Digital Easy Store hard drive with Acronis True Image software and Microsoft Office 365. All right, problem number one, Western Digital has absolute zero ethics. They make hard drives that lock themselves with a password, and of course you forget your password immediately, and no one on earth is ever able to get in. Also, they have an automated software called WD Smartware that destroys itself, and it's not readable on anything. So it's not human verifiable, it's not recoverable, it's totally pointless. And then the Acronis True Image takes an exact snapshot of your hard drive, which is better than nothing. But why would you want to take a corrupt copy of Windows and bring it forward into the future with you? All you need to do is specify the location of what you need and do a backup of just your stuff. You don't need to take the whole kit and caboodle.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he says, I should have read the fine print. It turns out there are several file types my plan does not back up automatically. No, that's not true at all. It's not file type. Again, it's location.
Yeah.
He didn't specify the location, and his computer jokers didn't understand that. Most of them don't. What do you think?
You know, I'm curious, where do you cloud? Where do you back up your stuff?
Once I get Carbonite victims away from there, I go to something called iDrive.com. Have you heard of them?
I have, yes.
Okay, there's a referral link on my website, and they give me $1 if any of y'all are interested. But I love them because they're big enough to compete. They're far more competent than Carbonite, and if you actually have a disaster, they actually care. Whereas Carbonite laughs at you and crashes halfway through, and it just restarts in an infinite loop of crashing. These guys actually care. They'll mail you a hard drive of all your stuff if you ever lose yours. Like if you need it in a hurry, like if you don't have time to do the download, they'll mail you a hard drive. They're big enough to compete, but small enough to have real human beings. It's this new thing called real human beings on a telephone.
Yes. You know, that's the thing. It's interesting. I remember, because I've lost hard drives, and it's crushing. Yeah. I remember the one hard drive that I lost, which was the most crushing. I took my son back when Obama was running, and he came through Kansas City, and I recorded a bunch of footage.
Cool.
And it crashed like 2 or 3 days later. I happened to process and made a video, but all of my raw data and everything, my whole drive was gone. And it was just an old drive. It was in the early days. And I always say, when you lose a drive, you become a stronger organism. You do things in a different way. You know,
when you have tragedy in your life too, it's the same thing actually. And you break a bone. When you break a bone, your bone comes back stronger, right? It's the same. Yeah.
Yeah, you just get better and better. But I've always heard that if you don't have your data backed up in at least 3 places, it's not backed up properly.
I like that. I usually say at least 2 places, but you're totally right. Absolutely, because people think, oh well, and again, it's my computer guy never said anything about backups, so they're just living on a prayer on the skin of their teeth with one computer. And I say, look, we have to do a proper backup. We'll do a verifiable backup. Again, like this dude who wrote the article here didn't bother verifying. We do a verifiable backup. I keep a backup at my parents' house. I keep one at my office. Yeah.
And that's the thing I think about this article that we've kind of touched on here is there's so many misperceptions. There's so many people that aren't giving good information from an IT perspective.
Myth, rumor, legend.
Yeah, they have no idea. Like I even know in with people that I deal with on a daily basis, a lot of things are on local drives, and they're like, well, what do you mean? What is Google Drive? It's like, hold on, we got to get to a place where you're putting this up in the cloud and you're backing it up, because there's just people that don't do it. They think that, and if something happens with their OS and you can't recover it, it's gone. And that's the problem.
Well, right, and I do a local drive, a local backup copy that's verifiable, right? A drag and drop, right? Where it's just a plain drag and drop. And as far as the cloud stuff goes, sure, 99% of people are unaware that Google Drive is sucking things out of their machine. So I set it up where they willingly back up to the cloud.
Yes. Yeah, that's the thing too. You got to get rid of the automation and do it yourself. That's the best way to do it. But I think But yeah, I think I'm so glad that you picked backup, because it's a big deal, and I don't think people take it seriously, and they lose things. I mean, I even have like a backdoor thing that I do on my web hoster. I have folders on there where I back up even on there. So if I have to go to an FTP and pull it down, I have a back door where I can just grab it and pull it down.
Brilliant. So it's like a little storage locker if you're in an airport and you rent a storage locker.
Exactly. And it's like, I only know where it's at. So sometimes I'm like, I want to go to that year of pictures, and I grab the zip, I pull it down, and it's right there. And I do it with a lot of stuff, whatever documents that are important or memorable or whatever. And I have it all backed up. So, yeah, and I used to save software and this, that, and the other, but I've gotten to a point now where I'm more concerned about things like, pictures and documents and those kinds of things. But you also realize too, after you've lost things, that there's things that you just don't need, or you don't want to hold on to, or you just, it's not going to do anything. It's kind of like that whole thing. Backing up hard drives is kind of like moving into a new house.
I was going to say
you haven't messed with this thing for a year or two.
Yeah.
Get rid of it.
Yeah, I just moved this week. Sure.
Yeah, just get rid of it. And there's something that's so cleansing and good about just exonerating and saging your life and being like, all right, I'm in a new place. I don't need this anymore. And you just move on.
And I'm going to do the same with my
existentialist.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I'm going through my stuff now, and I got rid of a lot of stuff before my move, and after I'm going to go through my hard drive, and I just noticed the other day, it's like, well, I have receipts in my documents folder in my hard drive from like 15 years ago. Like, I can toss those, and I will feel good, because it allows you, honestly, we're not saying get rid of everything, right? We're saying it allows you to focus on what you care about. It's just like when I had like 3 large TVs, and I'm one guy, right? So I got rid of 2 of the TVs, and I got rid of a lot of stuff so I can focus on the things that I do care about. I'm setting up a video game museum in my secondary bedroom, and instead of being in the closet, all my video games are going to be on display and accessible.
Yeah, that's awesome. I work with the guy that loves to collect games and different media just like that, and he has floppy disks, the big huge disks, and all kinds of stuff. It's crazy where we come from.
Yeah, a guy gave me, like 15 years ago, a buddy of mine gave me a sealed copy of Microsoft Windows version 1.
Wow.
And I kept it, and earlier this year I sold it to a guy for $4,000.
Wow.
Yeah, and I knew it was going to be worth something someday. And I was asking 12, and I should have held my ground, but he ended up giving me $4,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
I remember back in about 2008, I was driving home, and I noticed an iMac on the ground.
Oh.
It's like it was like bought for a girl. Like a dad bought it for the girl and didn't want it, got rid of it. So I get it and I put it in my art studio, plug it in. All of their files are on there. Everything's on there. I'm like, dude.
Right, that's
So
another thing, folks. Erase your stuff, hand it to us, hand it to someone who will properly erase.
That's the thing. So I get it, and I didn't really do anything with it. I used it as a media player. It was just kind of one of those things. It was back in CD days. I would put it in, and I used it in my art studio. But that's the thing that's weird about people is they think, oh, well, I'm just going to throw and destroy my phone. Well, you know what? Maybe you should think about that, because if someone gets that, I have found all kinds of phones, and there's been SD cards, or I plug it in and I see all this stuff. It's like there's a proper way to get rid of it. Just like backing up, there's a proper way to get rid of it too, and people should be cognizant.
Yeah, absolutely. Find a local person you trust to have a proper erase. And again, it's maybe they're trustworthy as people, but they're not totally competent with the technology, right? You got to find someone who's both, right? Yeah. And Joe, if you want to be my guy for Kansas City, we should talk about this, because I can, as I start my speaking tour, I can point people your way to get real proper care. Sure. So we should talk about that. Yes. Any final thoughts?
Oh, this has been wonderful, man. I am so glad that you asked me on. I'm so glad. I don't feel so alone either. I think sometimes tech people feel like we're floating around in a vacuum, and we have this thing that we can't really share with others. I kind of feel like that with podcasting too. Sometimes we're just doing this and going through it. It's a passion. We're doing it. But until we actually find another heartbeat out there that's doing the same thing, we don't find that tech fellowship, so to speak. So it's great that we ran into each other and we got it.
Yeah, because you and I, in our own social circles, are the only guys who know the tech, right? Yeah. And for years, for 10 years, I drove around town thinking I'm the only guy who could do this and the only guy in the world. I'm so thrilled whenever I meet someone competent. And thanks so much. Joe Dimino, how do people listen to your show?
If you want to just go out, probably the best way to do is to go to my website, joedimino.com. And on there, I have everything on there, whether it's my tech, my podcast feeds, my artwork, all of those things. They're all up there. And that will, the links to like LinkedIn, which has more of my tech background and all of those things. So it's a one-stop shop.
I did purchase markanthonyarena.com, and I'm going to do that eventually too, or just link it to all my different hobbies and sites. That's cool.
One of my best friends in the world, his name's Brian Kitahara. We call him Kato because he's a little sneaky. And he introduced me to all of the things. He introduced me to Google. I remember he sat me down in the late nights and said, check this out. And he typed my name in, and like all these things came up. He showed me YouTube. Anyway, he told me back in the day, just get your name as a URL. Trust me.
Buy your name.
Some flowery thing. I'm so glad, because there's all these Joe Diminos now. There's a guy that runs the Little League or the Minor League Hall of Fame. His name's Joe Dimino. There's an author. So I'll get dinged sometimes, but I have the URL, and sometimes I can just hear him mutter, who's this art guy in Kansas City that stole my URL?
And there's actually, Dimino's a big name where I live, and really? We know them, and they're a lot of it was a real great family. We know them, and it is. But yeah, absolutely, it's just go to not GoDaddy, avoid GoDaddy, folks, and just go anywhere else. My favorite for parking domain names is Namecheap, if you've heard of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, go to not GoDaddy and register your name. Anyway, so joedimino.com, and that's DIMINO. And you can listen to his show and see what he's all about. I am thecomputerexorcist.com or markanthonyarena.com. And you can buy my book for all your friends. And thanks so much for telling your friends about the show. We'll talk to you later.